I know you've probably heard of the term generational wealth. It's a buzzword, but what does it really mean? Well, we have an expert here, Dr. Latanya White, who's going to dive into generational wealth. Hi, Dr. Latanya White. How are you?
I am super excited. I'm doing so good. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for being here. This topic is so relevant. So, you work on the intersection of racial equity and entrepreneurship curriculum design. That's very interesting. But I want you to go more into your background and what led you to talking about generational wealth and doing this type of research.
Sure. So what I'll try not to do is start back for my 13th birthday, which I know for me truly was my origin story for developing this identity of being an entrepreneur. So kind of fast forwarding through, childhood and really figuring out why wasn't my mom able to be with me on milestone birthdays? And in retrospect, it was because she hadn't been the beneficiary of any inherited wealth. So she had to like grind it out and make ends meet, right? I think that's the story that a lot of us face. And so my challenge as I served, I taught entrepreneurship at Florida A&M University for 11 years. And a part of my advocacy and my passion for entrepreneurship was because I didn't have the language for it, right? I didn't have the logic for it, but somewhere like deep in my soul, I knew that entrepreneurship had to be a way to unlock access to wealth that my mom, although she had worked, her 30 years, got to retirement, we're still finding our way when it comes to economic mobility in a lot of cases. And I just had this idea that if there were more students at HBCUs, more Black families, more Black communities where we had control over how and when we created our own income and our own revenue, that things could really be different for my daughter and for those generations to come. And so that's what led me to my doctoral studies. And I was looking at Black entrepreneurship. I was looking at the racial wealth gap. But one of the things that I came across in my research was this idea of wealth dynasties and dynastic wealth. And so I was like, well, what is this? I was so excited. Like literally the model was there, right? This is what you do. This is how you're generating money. This is how you inform the rest of your family about it. This is how you package it and protect it. And I said, this is it. This is the blueprint. And then I realized that my family narrative, like my ancestral narrative, had not been accounted for in these steps, right? There was no discussion about how do you maneuver, how do you navigate through these types of conversations about money with a family that's never experienced money in excess, right? Like we make it to be able to keep the lights on, to survive, but we hadn't yet gotten to the point where we were thriving financially. So how can I talk to an entire Black family, right, about creating wealth that we're going to transfer to these next 2 or 3 generations when we're trying to get it for ourselves? And so what I had to do from what I learned was contextualize all of these steps, all of these different forms of capital for the Black experience, for the cost of being Black in America, for these systemic barriers to wealth building. I had to make sure that those things were accounted for in my approach to wealth transfer and to dynastic wealth.
You mentioned this idea of going from survival mode to thriving. And you
Mhm.
see decades later that we are still in that survival mode, right? You look at the stats, Black families achieve considerably less wealth than white families, with the median net worth of $24,100, $24,100, which is around 2,000 a month. Now, for white families, that number is $188,200. So first we have to think about, okay, well, what is generational wealth? What is wealth? How do we
Mhm.
define it so that we can determine why we are so far behind? So can you
Mhm.
define it for us?
Well, I'll say that my expertise is more on dynastic wealth. So what I learned was, while to your point in your opening, we're celebrating, we're as a people and as a culture, we're so excited about this idea of generational wealth. And for the most part, if you look up the definition of generational wealth, it's transferring financial assets from one generation to another. And hands down, that is extremely important. But if I present to you, and most of us have heard of the Rockefeller family, but if we really look at the nuances and the details of the Rockefeller family, John D. Rockefeller was the founding entrepreneur in that family, and they went under this antitrust lawsuit 1911. They had to break up the company. So here we are in 2023, almost 2024. The Rockefeller family remains one of America's 25 wealthiest families without having a core business. So it can't just be money that we're passing down to maintain and control wealth in these families. And that's where the dynastic wealth framework comes into play. That's where these qualitative forms of wealth come into play. So it's who are you as a family? What's your family identity, especially around money and wealth? How are you protecting that identity as well as those financial assets? And so when we're talking about generational wealth, that's the first pillar. But if we want to ensure that our grandchildren, so the third generation from me, is still in this place of upward economic mobility, I have to pass down more than just money to them. And it does have to come around passing down relationships, family history, family recipes, right? Those are things that are almost culturally specific to the Black family, at least as what's emerged from my research.
So we are taking this conversation deeper. It's not just the money we have to think about, right? We don't look at the number of zeros in our bank account, because the next generation could easily spend that money
Yes.
within decades, and your family has nothing to pass on to future generations. So let's take a step back and look at your generational wealth model as it relates to families. Where do you start?
So with the dynastic wealth, and so let me share this. I'll take a couple steps back. I was so excited. So the research shows that a family reaches dynastic status once they have control either the wealth that they are generating. So think of the Rockefeller family, the wealth that they're generating, or the business that they founded. So think of the Walton family, the Walmart family, for 3 consecutive generations. So from me to my daughter and just passing down money to her, that's generational wealth. From me to my daughter and to her children, from me to my sister and my cousins, from me to my mom and my aunts and uncles, and even my grandmother, that's dynastic wealth. So in dynastic families, the wealth isn't only transferred down, it's transferred in multiple directions. In dynastic families, the wealth isn't transferred just from one generation to the next, but in how they operate their business, how they establish their trust, and how they inform each other in their family interactions. And as a sidebar, these families do not have family reunions. They have family retreats. They have business meetings where they're doing portfolio analysis, right? Where is our money going? How are we training the next generation, the rising generation, for leadership in the family? Those things are beyond financial assets, right? It's about who are you in this family? What are your passion, skills, and abilities? And what's my responsibility as an elder and in our family to make sure that you self-actualize? How do I make sure that what you're good at, we help you learn how to operationalize and monetize so that you bring money back into this family doing what you love? It doesn't have to be my business, but we do as a unit need to ensure that we are controlling this wealth for 3 consecutive generations. And so those are the major points of distinction between what we understand generational wealth to be and the potential that we have to build Black dynasties.
So would you say generational wealth is completely different from dynastic wealth, or it's the first level of wealth
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
gets you to thinking about dynastic wealth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It definitely is that first building block because, right, there will be no dynasty if there is no money to pass down.
Yes.
Like it generational wealth, like that transfer of financial assets is absolutely essential. There isn't any research to date that puts a number on your dynastic family if your family worth is this amount. It really is about control, right? And we see that a lot in political arenas, in sports and business arenas. It's about control because we can own a pair of Jordans, but how much control do you have in how Nike says they're going to operate their business?
So you're talking about control versus ownership,
Yes.
because we've had a lot of ownership conversations. We need to own this and that, but that's not the only conversation that we need to have. We need to take it up a notch and talk about control. Well, what does control look like? What conversations do we need to have now so that we can think in a control mind frame?
Mm-hmm. So we talk about governance. So as the Black families that I work with, we'll look in. So first, we have to start with making sure that everybody ain't gonna be on the same page about what money means, about what wealth looks like. But as we work together through book club meetings and questioning and interviews and surveys and really kind of pulling all that family data together, when we're talking about control, we're talking about governance. We're talking about what are the rules, what are the policies that we operate by, and what's my influence on those policies, right? So in building out your family constitution and creating your family trust, the families that I work with, everybody's voice matters. And so what ends up happening is there's some family dynamics where, especially let's say you're the youngest, people have not taken you seriously in a lot of cases. So my role is to help amplify the value of that person's voice. That person's input goes into how this entity, I don't want to say a business because it doesn't have to be a business, but how are you protecting and operationalizing how you keep your money in your family? And so your role in that is a position of control because you have a say in this. You have input, your voice and your influence matters about what 3 generations from now, right? 4, 5, 6 generations from now, what will they experience because of your lived experience?
When I think about this, I think about the current family structure for so many people.
Mhm.
And it's you have the people who may have gone through the educational system, and so they
Mhm.
have more access to resources. And you may have those who are more so borrowers because the cost of living is too high for the income that they bring in, and so they're constantly borrowing every week. And so you have that person who's helping to care for an entire family unit, right? Their cousins, uncles, aunts, because they are the ones who so-called made it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so now, how do we shift that conversation? Let's say this person who has access to these resources, they're like, okay, I want to bring my family on board so that we can have these conversations, so that we can go from family reunions to family retreats. But how do I enlist the other members of my family and make that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's where I was actually. So my family and I, May of 2024 will make 4 years that we've been doing this work. And it started because I was in my literature review getting ready to get into like the data part of my dissertation, but I realized that I needed to develop my data collection skills. So I created this survey and I was just sharing it with my family. I asked them I was curious about their wealth personality. Like, how do you identify? What's your relationship with money and with wealth? Because I was just learning that income and wealth were different constructs, right? I was today years old finding that out. But what I learned from that survey. And so when I'm working with families, that's where we start. We need this benchmark data. We can't assume that we know a person's relationship with money and if they want to talk about money in a family setting or in a group setting. So from the survey, what I learned was that there were, and I mean, real estate professionals, educators, healthcare professionals, to your point, the people that had made it who admitted to not having a vision for their wealth. So the first thing that I needed to do was understand that we all had these different experiences that led us to where we are with our interactions with money. And so kind of fast forward a couple of months, I landed on this book. It's titled The Whiteness of Wealth. And so to really get into your question, I think that book, and that's one of the books that I use in the book club, is that helped everybody see their role. Because I have been coming to this conversation about wealth through this lens of entrepreneurship, right? So that was my positionality, but I was the only entrepreneur in the family. So I could see why don't nobody want to talk about that. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? But through The Whiteness of Wealth, Dorothy A. Brown is the author, Black woman, female tax attorney in the Atlanta area, I want to say. And in each chapter, she talks about the tax structure, the U.S. tax structure on home ownership, college, K through 12 learning, real estate development, retire, every different part of life, and how there are barriers built into the U.S. tax policy that prevent Black and brown families from building wealth. That was when we got to the place as a family unit where we could all say, oh, I understand how this relates to me. What are we going to do about it? And so I think in short answer to your question, it really comes down to helping people first see themselves, because sometimes we're going back to our earlier part of the conversation. We're so busy making ends meet. We're so busy surviving that we don't have the bandwidth, right? To see down the line 3 or 4 years, like, what is this decision going to cost me? Or what price have I already paid? What have I already sacrificed to be here? But The Whiteness of Wealth is a great starting point for a lot of Black families.
I am adding that to my list. The Whiteness of Wealth by Dorothy A. Brown. We need to have a follow-up conversation about that after I read it. I love that. I was just thinking about conversations with family members and making sure everybody is on the same page. Like you were saying, we all may have certain views about things based on our experiences. And we may not even think about income and wealth being two different things. Income is what you make. And as soon as you leave this earth, it can disappear. You can't pass on your income to the next generation, right? So you have not made it just because you made a certain amount of income. But your wealth are the assets that you've accumulated, that you own, that can be passed down. So you want to be thinking about the difference between the money that goes into your pocket and the money that you keep every year, and transfer that into an asset so that it goes beyond you. I like that. I like having those conversations to see where everybody is at, so we can then go to the education piece of it and identify those gaps in education among us. But I also like that you said, let's identify everyone's passions in the family, because everybody's contribution doesn't need to look the same, but we all need to make a contribution to the family plan in order to make it work. And that probably goes to your framework that you have behind you. I see your framework. I'm so curious about it. So can you let us know, what is your framework about? Break it down for us.
Oh my goodness. Oh, now I know we don't have too much more time, but this is what I love. What I love to talk about. So what I'll make sure to do is share the image for you. And maybe this will help if everyone can see. So at the top, we start with Dynastic Wealth. And this is really where we are beginning with the end in mind, right? So we're thinking about, what do we ultimately want to create? What do we want to leave behind? And that's a dynasty where for at least the next 3 generations, we've done our work to ensure that they're set. So under Dynastic Wealth is this idea called a generative script. And that's the narrative, that's the story that I tell me about me. That's the story that says, although the internet makes entrepreneurship look like the easiest thing since sliced bread, I'm committing to this work because I am creating something different. I am creating better. I'm creating greater than what I had, right? Through no fault of my own. I'm creating better opportunities for generations to come. So that's the generative script. That's me creating these opportunities for economic mobility through my own endeavors. And so we get into from there the establishment of these different forms of wealth. So there's the financial wealth, right? We talked about that's our building block, that's generational wealth. And so because my research really focuses on Black entrepreneurship, I study financial wealth through entrepreneurial income. But that's not to say your real estate income. That's not to say anything that you're doing outside. So maybe you're doing infinite banking through your insurance policies. That's not to say that you aren't able to build financial wealth through other means. The Dynastic Wealth framework, though, just has studied wealth building and wealth accumulation through the Black entrepreneurial experience. My favorite part of the framework, though, is spiritual wealth. So spiritual wealth is where we're talking about family identity. Spiritual wealth is where we're saying, what are the things that we value? What are the things that we want? 60 years from now, the generation that's emerging 60 years from now, which I may not be around to meet or interact with, what do I want them to know about who they come from, where they come from? And so spiritual identity is really this opportunity for Black families to take ownership, for lack of a better term, to take ownership of how future generations identify themselves, so that my daughter, she knows who she is from me and from our family, and not from social media, not from pop culture, not from whoever is controlling the public narrative about Black identity, right? She knows who she is because of what she's done and what she's been a part of in this family. So family identity and family values, that leads us into how are we going to document this? Just as a sidebar, the Department of Agriculture has this report that I referenced as I was doing my research. In the Southeast alone, Black family wealth we've lost somewhere around $1 billion in wealth because of heirs property, because no one knew whose name was on the deed to the land. Right. And so it's things like that we have to capture in our spiritual identity that helps these future generations say, oh, this is who I am. Right. I don't need Instagram or TikTok telling me what I'm supposed to be doing or who I'm supposed to be. Like, this is who I am. And so those things really feed into the governing document. So getting back to control, the governing documents of the family trust. And the family trust says, this is how we hope that you would, it's a little bit more rigorous than hoping. This is how you will use this money that we have set aside for your own economic well-being and your own economic mobility. So in my family, after a lot of discussion, there are 16 tax-paying adults that are a part of the family trust that we're building and funding. So that's why it's been 4 years, right, that we've been working on this thing. But that's also 4 years of mistakes and conversations and analysis that I've learned that I can save anybody else from having to extend their journey for that long. But our family trust in draft form now says that there are 4 things that you can request a distribution of wealth from our trust. And ain't nobody paying for no medical bills. We're not paying for no hospital bills. We will help you buy a home. We will help you advance your education. We will help you start a business, or we will help you start a philanthropic endeavor. Those are the 4 things that we agreed are going to be crucial to economic mobility. Now, kind of going back to ain't nobody paying for no funerals, right? A part of our family trust is that everybody individually has their own estate planning documents. So I would still have my own healthcare directive, my own will, my own living trust for my daughter. But our family trust is what we're looking at for collectively generations to come. And so, to your point, we would definitely have to have a follow-up conversation, but because that's just spiritual wealth, right? There's also the wealth of knowledge where we're capturing those family recipes because that's wealth, right? It may not be money, but it's wealth. The investing in intellectual wealth. So, what are you good at? How do I help you self-actualize and master that skill? And then on relational wealth, how do we ensure that leadership development is happening in the family? How do we ensure that you are being introduced to philanthropy as early as possible? It's not something that we have to wait to do until we're old. Philanthropic endeavors and service to the larger community can happen right now today. And so the dynastic wealth framework kind of encompasses all of those things.
Dr. Latanya, you got me excited. All right. I want to do a full deep dive into all of this because you are hitting on so many points that I've been thinking about lately. I have an 80-year-old grandmother, and I'm thinking I need to document everything so that future generations can understand how our family made it to this city and what's our history, because that will impact how they show up in this world.
Yes.
Oh, I love this so much. So, how do you help people? I'm sure there are so many people who want more information. How can they reach out to you? What services do you offer?
What I love to do, so you and I were sharing earlier, I did a lot of the technical assistance when I was teaching at FAMU, and that's where I help the individual entrepreneur. And because there's so many technical assistance programs and so little insights around the family unit, especially Black family wealth development, that's where my committee member, she's like, that's where you dance. And I think that's really where God has called me to serve. So the work that I do, the services that I provide is typically working with families, Black families, and that's as large or as small as you're comfortable with. That's your blood family or that's your found family, right? I know I'm closer to some of my friends than I am to some of my family members, and that's okay. So a part of those services is, as I was sharing, kind of walking through that baseline. Where are you? What's everybody doing? What's that insight? And then we build out their dynastic wealth documents. We'll draft the family constitution. I actually, although I'm not an estate planning attorney, I sit on the board for the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals. And so matching families and founders with Black estate planning professionals so that they can get their documents, their trust documents. But that's some of the work that I love to do for families. Now, on the institutional side, I work with entrepreneur support organizations to make sure that the Black and Brown founders that they work with know what dynastic wealth means. And so that they aren't leaving these accelerator programs or these pitch competitions with no clue about, well, what do I do with the money, right? How do I make sure that the next 3 generations are able to benefit from what I've done today?
I love it. Is there anything else you would like to share with us? So if anybody is just joining us, make sure you follow Dr. Latanya White on LinkedIn at Meet Dr. White.
Yes, please. So what I'll be doing in the new year is just hosting open house, like virtual open house events, where you dropping in and doing these deep dives like on a regular basis. So for those that are interested in learning more about what this could look like for your family, I love to connect with you. I was sharing with you, like, I have a profile on Instagram, but I'm not really on Instagram. So find me on LinkedIn and we can connect from there.
All right. Follow Dr. Latanya White on LinkedIn at Meet Dr. White. Dr. White, this has been a pleasure having you on to discuss dynastic wealth. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, feel free to leave them in a comment. Thank you so much. Have a good one.